evening and welcome back to part 2 of predictions for 2017 by the Hound Dog. And we were just about to go into geopolitics, and the first up on the list here is the Middle East. And the Middle East is such a quagmire right now. It's actually hard to decipher what really is going on there. I know there are several things that are pretty important. There is a natural gas pipeline that is running from northern Iran through Iraq and Syria, heading towards Europe. And this is very important to Israel because Israel has discovered natural gas off the Mediterranean coast there, the Leviathan fields I believe it's called. And of course Qatar has and Saudi Arabia both have natural gas interests that they want to pursue. It would seem that Saudi Arabia is funding ISIS, America is sending money to Saudi Arabia, even Canada is sending over military equipment. We send over a bunch of LAVs, which are land armoured vehicles, and they were armed with guns, I believe, to Saudi Arabia, who's been going into Yemen and trying to support the rebels there and destabilise that country. Libya is an absolute basket case. Syria is an absolute basket case. I saw a thing on Aleppo, and oh my God. So I was reading an article the other day in The Economist, the January edition, and it was about the fall of Aleppo. Now, I don't normally read The Economist, but I wanted to read this particular story. But there was a line here. I thought it was very telling. Okay, I'm just going to read you this little line from The Economist. And of course, this is the club. This is a Rothschild magazine. Anyway, the heading is Dust and Ashes, and it says, "This ideal of liberal intervention has suffered grievously. The American-led campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq demonstrated that even the most powerful country in history cannot impose democracy by force alone." So the way that is worded, that tells me that they never even planned to use détente or diplomacy to bring out the ideology of collectivism or globalism, or as they're now calling it, democracy. All those words are all interchangeable. And so this was the whole goal to begin with, was to force democracy down somebody else's throat, regardless. Now, you may say, well, Syria would be better off with democracy. But we have to remember, in all of these cases, these countries are sovereign countries. Okay, and no country can reserve the right to have a preemptive strike or to go into a sovereign country, without the, under any circumstances, I would say, it would have to be pretty serious, because, let's flip this over. It's something that I always like to do, because when you flip it over on the other side, you kind of get an idea of what it might feel like. So, say for example, all of the mullahs in Iran or Iraq or what have you decided that democracy was a failed ideology, and said, well, what you need is a dose of theocracy. Now, I suspect if they came over here and we had mullahs on the street with Kalashnikovs forcing theocracy down our throats, I just cannot imagine what America's response to that would be, or anybody's response. So, is it any wonder that they feel the way they do? The collapse of Libya, which was a catch-all for many migrants going north because they found a home in Libya, which was basically, a cooking pot of cultures and backgrounds and ethnic groups, and they all seem to coexist there one way or another. But it stopped the wholesale emigration into Europe. And so now you have all of the North Africans who are escaping, places like Somalia and such like, and the Congo and what have you, and Nigeria, um, Ghana. Where else is there? There seems to be trouble all over Africa, Ethiopia. So all of these people moving northward. Well, now they're going across the Mediterranean, including Syrian refugees, into Europe. And of course, as I mentioned before, this is a disaster, a recipe for disaster if ever I did see one. So what is the goal in the Middle East? Apart from energy, it's really hard to say. Is it a multi-goal kind of thing? Is this the idea of dragging Russia into Syria, knowing that it is a quagmire and that it's going to bankrupt Russia in the end, and that the Western allies will keep supplying the rebels to fight Bashar al-Assad and Russia that way, just as happened in Afghanistan, through the Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda. America was supplying Stinger missiles to wear down the Russians, and it did. It bankrupted the Russians. That was really the beginning, the end of the states of Russia as the USSR as we know it. And so, is that the goal? Who knows? These gamesters have so many games on the play. The Middle East is going to be what it's going to be. I have no idea. I can't. I think that maybe Trump might decide to pull out troops from the Middle East. I know he's talking about where American troops are stationed in other countries like Germany and South Korea. That they should begin paying for the luxury of having that security there, or we bring them home. And that might not be a bad idea. That might not be as difficult as you might think. A lot of these soldiers are going to be retiring, so the armed forces are going to dwindle through attrition. So, who knows how that might work out. So, moving along, Trump. What do I think Trump is going to do? To me, I see Trump as a trader, a trading kind of personality. He is the icebreaker. He likes to shake hands. He likes to sign that deal. I think the role that he played in The Apprentice is classic Trump, and I think probably that's what you're going to see when he's on the world stage. And do I think he's going to do good or not? I don't think he's a warmonger. That I'm pretty certain of. I think he's far more of a trader. He wants to do things in good times. War has some nasty blowback consequences, so I don't think you're going to see him not willingly go that route. But who knows? Who can tell? The world is really a very volatile place, and there are so many little situations which could quickly flare up. It's kind of hard to say what would be required in the future. Although I do see, that this trading attitude would certainly benefit South America, because Brazil, Venezuela, and Argentina are just absolute basket cases right now, and who knows what they're going to look like. Venezuela, of course, along with India, has begun a war on cash. So I believe I heard today that the largest bill in Venezuela right now is 25 cents, worth 25 cents. And this is to prevent a flight of cash out of the country. So they really could use trade balancing in the world. Here are three countries who are or three states within a country who are very productive. They have a large labor force. They have a lot of resources and minerals and that kind of stuff. Large agricultural background. There's absolutely no reason why these countries can't be a success. And I think we're seeing more and more that this central management style, this government style that we now have, it's kind of outdating itself, and we're seeing that it's just not working very well in the 21st century. Because a lot of things are being reviewed, and we're viewing them in a different light. South Korea. South Korea is in a precarious position right now. You have a Prime Minister, Hwang Kyo-yan, that takes over as president after the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye. There was riots in the street demanding the steps down, so it wasn't pretty. And of course, this is a time when tension is actually rising with North Korea, and so this could be another flashpoint in the world. North Korea is still struggling to find its place on a world stage and not being very successful at it. So really, this is a wild card, and yeah, King Kim Jong-il is definitely a big question mark going forward. So as you can see, the more we go through this, there's a lot of uncertainty and almost unpredictability about the course of next year. And given the weather changes that I spoke in the last video, this is also going to add pressures. I remember reading a Rand Corporation think tank piece on the carrying ability of the world, and one of the parts stated that in human history, this has never been contradicted, and that is that when humans get hungry, they only do one thing: they raid. Okay, so if a country's getting hungry, you can see border skirmishes, especially if it's a sort of dividing weather line. And one side of that weather line is dry, and the other side has a fairly abundant water. You may see some clashes over that kind of issue. You see, and of course, this refugee crisis. We have to talk about this, and this is not in any way directed against any particular ethnic group. This is really talking about the weight of bodies of people. So in any country, most countries that are fairly well organized have an emergency measures department where they can take care of an influx of refugees, an emergency situation, a disaster, this kind of stuff. A short-term department to take care of these kind of issues. Well, now we have literally hundreds of thousands of migrants streaming across the Mediterranean and up through Turkey and into Greece, and as a result, you now have probably 2 or 3 million people in Europe that have no home, they have no food, they have no clean water, they have no access to clean facilities, places to clean their clothes, to keep themselves well kept, who are now wandering through Europe in what is a hostile environment because people are very, very scared of these desperate people. Just think about that for a second. If you're a father with a family, wife, 2 or 3 children, maybe a grandparent with you, or an uncle or a cousin or what have you, and you are in this wilderness and there's no friendly faces around, and you're hungry and you're wet and you're shivering, what would you do? It's a scary question to answer, isn't it? Well, that's what it's like for these people going through Europe. This tent city that they took down in Calais recently is all very fine, but those people all had to go somewhere. So we're going to have to come up with a solution of some kind, because they're already there, they're in those countries, and either you fix the countries they came from so they can go back home, or we have to come up with a solution that is not only humanitarian but humane. Okay? There are 36,000 unpapered children roaming through Europe right now, going feral. This is not a good situation. This is a situation for breakdown of societal cohesion. Because when people are scared, they do strange things. They see things a different way. When people are frightened of other people, the people who they're frightened of know that they appear scary to this other group of people. I mean, I can completely understand not being able to speak the language very well. It must be a terrible, terrible situation. But this is going to collapse some of these countries who cannot possibly carry this burden. Brexit was a real signal as well, that Britain has had enough of not only being forced to take more migrants than the country can possibly deal with, but also it was a backlash against globalism. And I can tell you this right now, the reason that Brexit became the vote it did, and the same with Trump winning the election, although it seems more and more, when now the results are in, that really more Clinton lost the election than Trump winning it. But they both had a similar aspect to them, and they're doing the same thing in France, is that they villainized the person who supported leaving Europe. They villainized the person supporting Trump, or even asking questions about his policies or lack of policies or what have you. If anything sounded like it was pro-Trump or anti-Clinton, oh my God. Same thing, if you supported exiting Europe, oh, you're a backward thinker. And a racist too. Well, you know what? You're not having much more of a conversation when people call you names like that. And so what happens is, these people, they hold those feelings close to the heart, and they wait for election time, and you know what? Hey, call me a racist? Take that. And that's what happens when you shut down the conversation. Okay? Conversations have to be allowed to happen. They need to be allowed to take place in coffee shops, in people's living rooms, dining room tables, barber shops, wherever. Because that's how you change people's minds, by openly talking about the pros and cons of whether that's correct thinking or the right direction to go in. And so shutting down the conversation is not a good idea, and they're doing this in France. Okay, Marine Le Pen is being labelled the most dangerous woman in Europe because she has promised, should she be elected, the first thing that she will do, there will be a Frexit. Okay, and if there is a Frexit, and this is really over the influx of migrants into France through Marseille, I will guarantee you that Europe, Italy, Spain and Portugal will be very close on the heels. And that, my friends, will be the end of the European experiment. So, yes, difficult times in Europe. I think in the Ukraine there is going to be ongoing border tensions, although things have been pretty quiet since the Crimea voted to go into Russia. We may have reached a kind of standoff position, but this is just the beginning of winter, and usually if there's going to be any problems it's during the winter time, because this is when natural gas, the majority of which flows through the Ukraine, and Ukraine also has a massive bill to Russia for natural gas, and of course the natural gas for Europe runs through the Ukraine. So there is a leverage point there. Ukraine has played this card before, and Russia has played hardball with Ukraine, but and of course this may be the increasing interest in Syria and putting that pipeline through as another route to Europe. So lots of interesting potentialities coming down the track next year. But I do think that probably the overriding thing, two things are going to be the environment and the economy. And this debt has to go somewhere. Unresolved debt just doesn't work. And I actually think that the bankers, the central banks, realise that the only resolution to this is actually a Jubilee Day. Okay, but I think what they've been trying to figure out is how they can have a Jubilee Day and we don't get to have a Jubilee Day. Okay, so that being the case, well, you just can't do that, because they took all those mortgages and they sliced them up into little pieces and they attached them to other bits of investment instruments, and so it is all just too complicated, and we either all go or we don't all go. I think that because of the time delay in trying to work that out, I think we mentioned before about Eaton syndrome, how the successive generations have lost track of what's happening, and they don't really understand what's happening in the money world, and they never had the experience of pitchforks and lanterns coming down the street looking for you. And that's why we have Jubilee days, because they went through that. They went through that and they figured it out. They went, no, we don't want to do that again. And so that's probably what's going to come down the track, or just a complete seizure. Okay, a complete seizure. So I think we're looking at a mixed up 2017, and I would hold on to your hats, folks, because I think we're going to be seeing things that we haven't seen in a long time. But Trump, I don't think Trump is going to be as bad as people think he's going to be. Conrad Black actually described him as a moderate with a few pyrotechnics, and for Conrad Black to call him a moderate probably puts him into, again, somewhere between the Republican and Democratic camp. Let's see. I mean, the interesting thing that has happened here is that, the globalist movement, as I mentioned in The Economist there, has been using force to push forward its ideology, to support its central banking system. And now Trump has the keys to that battleship. And I can't imagine for a second that the globalists are very, very happy about this. I still think there will be some fireworks to come over this down the track as well, because we're looking at trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars worth of deals here, and I just can't see them letting that go, or unless they have so many strings behind the scenes, that they can pull on with these private armies. You see, there's all kinds of contractors in the world these days. There's probably as many armed privateers as there is regular fighting people, and they can be mobilized. They can be bought and paid for by anyone and anything who has enough money to pay them and ship them to the place that they want to go to, and these people will fight for any reason whatsoever. So that's an issue. Okay, so what else have we got here? I think that I think Clinton's probably going to fade into the background, but Bill. One thing I did notice about Bill and Hillary, of course, Hillary was probably had a makeup artist, but there were times when you could see she was looking very tired and strained from the effort, and Bill, sometimes he didn't look too bad, but there was other times when he looked like a walking cadaver. I mean, it was just brutal. So I kind of wonder. Okay, so let's move on to, let me see. Could there be a war? Well, there's already about 7 or 8 conflicts going on right now, and of course, will India's war on cash do its population and its relationship with Kashmir and Pakistan edgy at the best of times? I mean, the people in India have a much different relationship with money than we do, money and gold in their country. And by taking away the largest denomination bills, the communist denomination bills, this has put quite a burden. It's made you be the banker now. And of course, the Indian people are quite reactionary about that kind of stuff. So, and of course, Kashmir, India, and Pakistan, there's always been a kind of an edgy line between those 3 countries, and dispute over ownership. So, yes. Okay. Society. What can we say about society? Well, society is moving in a very interesting direction, and one of those directions is caused by this little baby right here. And handy though it is, um, one of the dangers of this little device is you tend to see the world in small pictures. And I think that that makes it psychologically more difficult to put the big picture together if you're not looking at the computer or reading up on some of these stories and finding out some of the background. Um, so these are a way to actually prevent people from stretching out and hearing other things and putting two and two together. Um, they're also mesmerizing. In Toronto this year there was so many accidents from people walking out into the street in front of cars, people texting whilst driving. It's actually quite scary how this has taken over for friendship, for conversation. Quite often you go into a restaurant and you'll see four people, and the first thing they do is they put the phone down on the table, waiting for it to buzz, and then you see people texting. They're actually texting. I went to a concert just recently, and there was a woman in front of me texting, and I thought, what are you doing here at this concert? I mean, why would you have that phone out? And she texted for, I bet you, half the concert. So yeah, these little devices, well, they're becoming addictive. I think they're calling it more addictive than crack cocaine. So there you go. I think that the millennials are going to be an issue, because I heard a very interesting piece on the millennial generation coming up, and they really have been deprived of the experience that it takes to learn some of the hardships in real life. And don't get me wrong, I know an awful lot of these people through the store and through friendship, and they are by and large good people, but I just kind of feel that they've been led to have too higher expectation level. And of course, this, I think, comes about when you get a little older and you scrape your elbows and you scrape your knees and you realize that life isn't actually fair and it doesn't owe you anything. Those are actually very hard lessons to learn. And so I think we do have some more difficult times, shall we say, up ahead. We have some wonderful opportunities that will come out of those times as well, don't get me wrong. But I think we're moving. We're going to be moving back into a little bit of austerity, just based on the cost of living. There's only so much money to go around from a paycheck, and if more and more is being snatched up in carbon taxes, hydro bills, food, insurance, property taxes, this kind of stuff, then there is less to spread around everywhere else, and that spells austerity of some kind or other. Less nights out, less going for dinner, less movies, more at-home activities if you have a family with children, more board games, this kind of stuff, maybe learning how to play a musical instrument, because these things are relatively inexpensive to do and actually very, very rewarding. And so I wonder if this is going to lose its novelty because of that. And I mean, I also see, because a lot of parents are actually paying for these services. I know people who are paying $240, $250 a month just to be connected through, 3 cell phones on a family package and cable hookup and computer hookup at home. Well, that's a chunk of dough, that may be half a week's groceries just to be hooked up. So I wonder how many parents are actually going to say, well, if you want to have the phone, you're going to have to pay for it. And that'll be an interesting experience, I can assure you. I think something society has to start doing again is learning to be more cohesive and less separated. There are obviously some enormous changes that need to take place within society, the way we deal with certain issues. We can see with the way, kids are coming out of school and can't read and write. That's not me. StatsCan came out not so long ago saying that 50% of university students were struggling with grade 10 concepts in math and could barely read and write well enough to understand the curriculum. That's 50%. This is our best and brightest. That's not good. So we have to address these issues, and issues like infrastructure, issues like an aging population. How are we going to deal with that? Are we going to have retirement homes for everybody, or are we going to build custom-built fourplexes, where, for example, you have somebody who doesn't see, has got macular degeneration, helps a person who needs someone with a wheel push around a wheelchair. Okay, so the person in the wheelchair is that person's eyes, and the other person is the other person's legs. Are we going to have to fend more for ourselves? Because there is a huge wallop of people coming up through the retirement process. I believe the statistic is 1 every 7 seconds. I mean, that is staggering number of people, and we're already seeing shortages in labour, skilled labour, this kind of stuff. People being called back out of retirement under contract to fill these kind of spaces that can't be filled by young people up and coming. These are all big issues that we're going to have to address, and we're going to have to address them as a society, not as a government telling us how to solve these, because I think it's been proven that government is actually pretty poor at solving these situations, and I actually want to go through some specifics in another video. And you're going to shake your head in wonder as to how on earth this has managed to keep rolling along for as long as it has. So unless we start working on some of those changes, acting as cohesive units, coming together when for community interests. Say, for example, we just had this recently in City Quarter Lakes. The council was set to close a bunch of arenas and community centres, and the communities finally rallied together, and we got a stay to take on private boards, volunteer boards, to take over these arenas and community centres, as an alternative to actually just shutting them down and saying we're not going to provide that service in the future. So again, this takes participation on behalf of the public, takes volunteerism, and I think this is how we do move towards a more agoristic kind of society and community, where we're all pulling together for our own benefit. So I'm hoping that these are directions that are going to start happening in 2017. I certainly think the motivators are going to start they're already happening. This carbon tax, it sounds like nothing, 4 cents on a litre of gasoline, but you know what? What about the guy who drives the vegetables from the farm to the boxing place, and the guy that works at the place that boxes or bags them up, and then the guy who ships them out, and then the guy who works at the supermarket, and then the supermarket owner? All these people all had 4-cent increases per litre on their energy, and whatever the increase is on your hydro bill every month. So these are not little increases, these start adding up and compounding with each other. So this is really going to affect people's lifestyles. I expect us to crimp spending a lot this year, and of course this is what moves the river of society. These changes that come about all of a sudden, like I say, you find playing a musical instrument and knitting interesting where you saw no interest whatsoever, doing a jigsaw puzzle or carving or whatever it is that you want to occupy yourself with. So this is going to cause quite big shifts, and of course this is going to affect the economy. So you get this kind of ping pong effect. You have things that you could be leveraged for, like food, energy, heating, this kind of stuff, gasoline, so on and so forth, and all of a sudden you're staying home, which means less money is being spent in the economy, which affects prices again because things aren't being. So it's a thing that is all connected and will have far greater effects than I think Kathleen Wynne is anticipating. I don't know who is advising this person, but I suggest that she stop listening to them because they're selling her a bill of goods. I can tell you right now, this is all going to end in tears. So I think that's about it. Let me see. Oh, advice to students at universities. Courses that are up and coming. I think as far as the work field is concerned, if you can't produce something tangible at the end of the day with what you've learnt, you're probably not going to get a job. I think employers are going to become a lot more insistent on results. You're seeing with acquisitions and mergers that you have to justify your position. So if you are doing something like social studies or English, it probably isn't going to get you a job. It may be your foothold into doing another degree. It may be a foothold into a lower position in a job that might lead to something, but you want to be thinking of something a lot more practical. I think you're actually going to see a shift to the trades. I think you're going to see people going to college rather than university, because colleges tend to be more on the practical side, and university courses are really going to become more practical oriented, because employers are going to demand, hey listen, we can't use kids that can't do anything. Yeah, they can read, but everyone can read, right? Well, maybe only 50% can, but you know what I mean. So no, you're going to have, you can operate a computer. Well, that's great. Well, everyone can operate a computer. This is no longer a skill; it's a necessity. Okay, so a lot of these courses, I think you're going to find, are going to be abandoned. I think parents are going to put an awful lot of pressure on their children to choose more practical courses than the arts. I'm not quite sure what effect this is going to have on society, but I can certainly see why, because it's, if you can't get a job, you can't pay off your student loan, unless you're lucky enough to have parents who can pay for your student loan. But this is going to lead to a lot of pressure by parents and students, of course, who are talking to maybe older brothers and sisters, friends from grades that have already gone ahead of them, saying, "Oh my God, I've looked at the job market and there is nothing. There's lineups everywhere from what I'm doing, and I'm going to have to be a waiter or a busboy or what have you for a long time until I find something." And especially if you're thinking of going into a course that is time sensitive, like computer studies. Okay, if you wait a year before you can land yourself a position, you may find, unless you studied hard in that year, that your computer skills have become dated, because the computer field is moving so incredibly quickly. It's gonna, well, you're gonna look before you leap. You're gonna make sure you have that position before you even go to university. I think you're going to see some of these movements that we're seeing today. They call them social justice warriors. I think they're going to recede into the background because they don't bring people together. I just got into a situation, an argument with a social justice warrior, and boy oh boy, I was called names and all kinds of things, simply because I said that we are all equal and we all deserve equal rights. And I was called a white supremacist for having that attitude, and that no, we're not all equal, and that we're not all entitled to equal rights. Those who've been more abused are more entitled, apparently, than other people. Well, how's that going to work? Was it Einstein said that you can't solve problems by using the thinking that you use to get into the problem. So really, that's what we've been doing, is we've been segregating people, and we've been using prejudice or socioeconomic status as a way to put people down, hold people back, that kind of stuff. And we've realized that that's wrong. And you can't rectify the past. That's the unfortunate thing. You can't turn back the clock and say, well, we'll do it a different way. You can only move forward, and from that point forward accept that everyone has the same rights and they're all inalienable. That's the only way that we can coexist going forward. and that there are only 3 laws. There have only ever been 3 laws. We don't need 55,000 statutes and acts and goodness knows what else to govern us. Okay, the 3 natural laws are: you can't kill anybody, you can't hurt anybody, and you must be honest in your contracts. And if you follow those 3 things, you know what, you will not go far wrong by anybody, because we're here now because all of those 3 things have been broken liberally by every government and agency that you can think of. And so, like I say, we can't turn back the clock. We can only acknowledge and apologize and ask for forgiveness for the acts of our forefathers. But that wasn't me. Okay, that wasn't our generation who did that. And that's why things have changed, and things have changed remarkably. There is much less restrictions, and forced equity just doesn't work. It's interesting, I believe it's in Finland. Okay, they did a study. Now in Finland, if you want to be Ronald McDonald, you are going to get no hassles. There'll be no things holding you back. You can do whatever you like in Finland without fear of rebuke or glass ceiling or what have you. And what do we actually see? That more women tend to move towards the nursing and caring trades, and men tend to move more towards the engineering, construction kind of trades, the more physical kind of stuff. So what does that say? That we're hardwired to do those kind of things? You can't force people, you can't force equity. I mean, what about nursing, for example, or teaching? Should we force a moratorium on hiring women until we have equal representation with men? There just aren't enough men who want to go into teaching to do that, so it makes no sense to try and ask for those kind of things. What you do is you remove the barriers for either sex to enter that profession, and you allow those who want to gravitate towards it, and those who don't. It's as simple as that. Nobody should be forced to do something because of some equity law is insisting that there be some kind of bizarre equality. And I'm sure that you would immediately see the problem. Should we force something like, okay, let's just say we force a moratorium with teaching and with nursing, that there is 0 female input until we have absolute parity with men. I think there would be an outcry. So why are we not seeing an outcry when we're forcing women into engineering positions who don't want to be engineers? Those that are engineers or do want to be engineers are in the minority. And kudos to them who do want to be engineers. I've got absolutely no problem with that. But I think we should just allow nature to take its place. We should concentrate on removing the barriers and just let people do what they gravitate towards naturally. That to me is true equality, and I don't think we're ever going to find true equality unless we have this big forgiveness and moving forward. That it doesn't matter what your race, creed, colour or historical background, we all have inalienable rights, and they cannot be changed. They are human rights, because we are all humans at the end of it. So, well, that's about it, and I'd like to thank you all for listening who made it this far, and I hope you all have a great new year. Please keep your ear to the rail and watch for the signs, and pay attention to what's going on around you, and hopefully we can create the kind of world that we want to live in. Okay, thanks a lot. This is Hound Dog Steve Clark signing off.